guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, "Neighbor built a legal pool on my property and destroyed my driveway." Hello all. I just want to start this story with the point I know that sometimes the property lines of places aren't the clearest things and accidents can happen. When you have to destroy someone's property to accomplish a goal, though you very well know what kind of horrible person you are and that it was no accident. On to my neighbor who actually owns a company that is a pretty big household name around here. Unfortunately, that has caused him to have an inflated ego bigger than a convention of hot air balloons. He thinks that he is better than everyone else and has no issues letting people know it. For a small example, he has a new fancy sports car that he drives around everywhere. That alone isn't a problem, but then he talks to everyone else about how their cars suck in comparison and they probably would never be able to afford a car like his. So basically, the biggest snob in the world and his wife who does nothing all day is just as bad. They have more money than they should because he also brags about knowing how to get away without paying taxes for his company. Everyone knows that it is a big thing that celebrities and all rich people have houses with pools. Neighbor didn't want to be seen without having one and wanted one installed in his backyard. Keep in mind for this story, this wasn't an above-ground pool. This was in-ground and half of their yard had to get a space for it. I knew right away there was an issue when I saw them digging up a portion of my driveway for where the pool was going to be. I could only guess because of their septic tank location they didn't have enough room and didn't want to get a smaller pool because they had to be the best. Point is that was my land they destroyed and were planning on building a pool in. Neighbor wasn't home and the man running construction didn't seem to want anything to do with me. So instead, I waited, and the entire pool was built, some of which passed the property line and in my yard. Due to the ego, we already established talking to my neighbor was going to be completely pointless as he knew what he was doing. He was even giving me sly smiles every time he would catch me looking at him in the pool. So, I went to the city and reported that the pool was built on part of my land, and I wanted it resolved. The person helping me tried to pull up neighbor's permits to see how it got approved to cross the property line in the first place. It turns out that those permits didn't actually exist, and he was doing all of this under the table and without the city's permission. They didn't have to worry about his ego and demanded that he remove the entire pool immediately. Within a few days his pool was gone, and his backyard was just one giant hole until he could get someone to come cover it with dirt and grass seed. He was so angry and started yelling at me for doing this because I was jealous that he could afford a pool and I was a nobody who could never dream of one. That gave me a brilliant idea of how to get this guy back even further. See, what he didn't know was that I actually had a decent amount of money myself. I just didn't feel the need to brag about it and buy fancy cars, so I had a good amount saved. I had neighbor eat his words when I got the permits to have a pool installed in my backyard. It was actually going to be used, by the way. It wasn't just me building a pool to sit there and piss him off. Still, I could see that he was furious he didn't get to have a pool, and now I had one in my yard that I swam in almost every sunny day that spring and summer. I could see him watching and glaring at me, but I could only smile and wave to him in response. The nicer I looked, the angrier he seemed to get about the whole thing. I even had a little summer party one day and the neighbors all came, and I did a barbecue and we all hung out by the pool. Neighbor of course didn't come, and instead I could see him glaring at me through his windows the entire day. The whole thing was fantastic and felt like I created the perfect revenge ice cream sundae. The only thing missing of course was the cherry on top that would finally knock neighbor off of his high horse. Even without the pool, nothing really changed with his bragging and demeaning other people. I needed to hit him in the place that he seemed to store his heart, his wallet. I made some anonymous calls to the IRS regarding his company and how he had been evading paying taxes. It was easy since he loved talking about it, and I am shocked he wasn't found out years ago about what he was doing. I am not well versed in these things, but basically he was getting out of it by making hefty donations to an organization that didn't actually exist and was in his wife's name. Essentially, they were just shifting money around while pretending to get tax deductions for giving charity. Know that much information though is going to make it a very quick investigation for the IRS to look into neighbor and what else he was hiding from them. When people tell you to never mess with the IRS, they aren't joking around. I got most of the following information from town gossip, but it all seems to add up. The IRS caught him, and neighbor now owed years of back taxes and fees to them. He didn't have the money though, and his company had to file for bankruptcy and shut down completely. I don't know if it was because he was the owner or since he got his wife involved, but the IRS seemed to come for him personally as well. Maybe he was screwing them out of his personal taxes as well, knowing him. He ended up going bankrupt as well and moving out of his house because he couldn't afford to keep it. He had no savings, no house, and no company after the IRS got finished with him. The last I heard was one of the other neighbors heard they were living with family and both of them were trying to find work so they could make some money and maybe afford an apartment. The next story is entitled Neighbor Sneaks on Property and Cuts Down Old Oak Tree to Have a Better View. So this is a story of when I was a child and was living at my parents' house. For context, my parents and I live in France and they bought some land 25 years ago. Now the land plot was located on a hill and had an incredible view of the Mont Blanc. At that time, we just had one neighbor and our house was quickly constructed. A few years later, the area became quite popular, and all the available plots on the hill were bought, constructed. Now, when I was about 14/15 of a year old, we already knew that one of our neighbors, EN, was a piece of work. I only remember that she was super weird, like walking naked in their driveway that was right below my window, but can't recall much more. One day, EN comes by our house and asks to talk to my dad. She says that she is hiring a gardener to clean up the bushes on her side of her property, and is asking nicely if said gardener can trim some of our trees' branches that are crossing to her side. No problem. As in France, it's expected to cut the branches that are bridging to your neighbor's side. My dad offers to do it himself, but EN insists that it's best if her gardener does it. EN and Dad agree. A few weeks later, we go on vacation and forget a little bit about the whole ordeal. Well, you can already guess that we came home to a big surprise. Turns out that trimming does not mean the same thing to some of the entitled neighbors out there. A whole tree was missing. Like a big whole tree. We decided to keep our calm and to go to EN house to hear what she has to say for her defense. Guys, this EN told her gardener to cut down our old oak tree so that she can have a better view on the Mont Blanc. She even acted shocked to learn that was an oak tree and tried to explain to us that the gardener said it was just random trees. We were furious at the audacity of the woman. Turns out that EN thought she was entitled to have a view on the Mont Blanc, since she moved in, few years after us, she never got a chance to see the landscape due to our trees. Like EN bought her house knowing it didn't have a view on the landscape, but thought after 10 years of having our trees, it's time to cut them down. We tried to hear some more from EN's gardener because the guy obviously went on our property when we weren't there and cut down an old oak tree without our consent. He said that EN told him we've been neighbors for so long, and that she had our consent to take it down. I wish I could say we have some sort of revenge or even got it replaced, but to buy a full-size tree is really expensive. The best we accomplished was to have her give us a bit of money to buy another tree. I'd like to remember that even though we didn't have enough to buy another oak, we bought a tree with even more branches. Edit. Thanks a lot for the replies, guys. For those of you wondering, a few years after this incident, my parents got divorced, we moved out of the house and sold it. At the time, we thought it was more valuable to try to keep a decent relationship with our neighbors instead of trying to sue the EN. To be fair, it was the only time EN crossed the border, otherwise she was just a bit crazy but nothing too serious. The next story is titled, Who Thought That Mounting Bright Headlights on the Back of Their Truck Was a Good Idea? Exactly, the title happened while I was on my way home down a long stretch of road. My initial assumption, despite my disgruntlement, is that the owner of this truck was tired of people approaching from behind with their high beams on. Ordinarily I might even applaud the ingenuity since I, too, don't like it when people drive behind me with their high beams on, shining right into my rearview mirror, leaving me near half blind in the goddamn Batman dark of the freaking night. Man, what the hell is wrong with you people? But the thing is, a long time ago, after flicking my high beams on at a cop on accident because I thought his high beams were on, and thus learning from the same very understanding cop that having high beams on no matter how briefly in a city isn't exactly legal, I've largely kept mine off since, save the occasional empty stretch of country road. And then there was this daft donkey that just left his on, making me think on approach from afar that maybe, Just maybe, the bright headlights I was seeing was another car in the opposite lane and would thus pass me soon. And I wouldn't have to deal with it after. So the seconds passed. Then some more. And I found it odd. A line of cars on the other lane in this 2-lane stretch of road had come and gone. All of their lights at reasonable levels, I might add. And there was still this one car very slowly creeping up with some very bright headlights. Like seriously, right level and everything, it had to be another car, right? Nope. As I got closer, I had to slow down a bit because I was starting to squint. It was that goddamn bright, these headlights, wherein I say to myself, that's odd. It looks like this car is right in front of me. Driving backwards. Annoyance mounted, benefit of the doubt given. Maybe it's a car being towed and they forgot to turn off the lights, I thought. Rage replaced that line of thought not a mile or two from the final intersection on this stretch of road when the owner must have realized what was going on and finally turned off those hell lights. Upon which, through the blurry haze from having those stupid lights on me all that time, I could finally see that it was some kind of truck. Or maybe a Hummer, given the brake lights mounted on a giant spare tire on the tail end. So to conclude, and again, I'd understand and maybe even appreciate it a little, legality aside, if it were a brief button push flash to try and get a following driver to turn down their freaking lights, but why? If these are supposed to be spotlights, why are the pair of them clearly cabin controlled and mounted low to the road to look like another driver? Why would they do this? There's no satisfactory ending to this. It's making me seriously reconsider putting off the purchase of a dash camera to get it now. But I have no identifiable imagery of this Flash Gordon wannabe mobile. Just a very blurry rage shot from a carefully fished out phone camera on approach to the intersection. Couldn't get a plate or anything. The last story is titled, Valley Girl Lady Wanted to Call the Cops on Us for Waiting in My Truck. My roommate and I had to head to Vancouver to buy a front passenger side fender panel off of a truck to replace the badly dented one on mine. We assumed the traffic would be really bad, so we left a bit earlier. The plan was to meet the guy at 6 p.m. after he got off work. But we arrived about 40 minutes earlier than expected. So I sent him a message on OfferUp that we'd sit and wait. So we parked in a nice open spot across the street in front of a house with a fence. No big deal. There were other people there and they didn't seem to mind us at all. We were waiting about 30 minutes just sitting and watching YouTube videos. And during that time a woman parked her car in front of another house a ways ahead of us. But we paid no attention to her. I was just sitting and watching Cyanide and Happiness on my phone when suddenly I noticed a woman creeping up to my truck. I say creeping because she'd walk a few feet and just stare, then walk a few more feet doing the same thing. I tapped my roommate on the arm to signal to him she was there. The lady, VG, finally walked right up to our passenger window and asked why we were there. And she spoke with a somewhat condescending Valley Girl-like accent and used the word, like, a lot. She looked about 35 plus from what I could tell. The following is more or less paraphrased, but should be pretty close to how the conversation actually was. VG. What are you doing here? Me. Oh, we're just waiting on somebody. VG. Okay, because I was getting ready to call the cops on you because I thought you were stalking me or something because you were sitting here for so long. Roommate and I just give each other a look like we're saying, is this lady serious? So I laughed and said, oh, believe me, I get it. Gotta make sure and look out for yourself. Then I pointed across the street and said, you see that red truck over there? We're waiting for the guy that owns it to get home because I want to buy parts off of it. He's selling the truck in pieces on OfferUp. VG gave an awkward pause and said, okay, because I don't know you. And this is a really close-knit neighborhood. Plus your truck has Oregon plates on it. So I just wanted to make sure you weren't scoping me out or anything. We have a neighborhood watch here. Me. Laughs awkwardly, nope. We're just here to buy a fender panel off that truck and that's pretty much it. She didn't say anything more after that and just walked away. And soon drove off in her car. Then the guy we were meeting got home and we told him about VG. And when he heard her description he said he wasn't even sure she actually lived in his neighborhood because he'd never seen her. We were all confused but just got to work getting the fender off the truck and forgot about it. Thank you for listening.